Roll the credits, the story's not over yet. Pull up a chair, let's unpack the ending. Every finale leaves a clue. Come find the meaning with us.
When a pre-wedding confession completely shatters the illusion of a perfect relationship, how far will two people go to rebuild a story they can both live with? Thank you for joining me on this week's episode of the Finale Compass. I'm your host, Jazmin, and every week I'll be looking at how fictional plot twists reflect the very real, sometimes bizarre ways human beings handle secrets, pressure, and pivot points. Today, we're diving into the A24 box office hit, The Drama, starring Robert Pattinson and Zendaya. We're dissecting what happens when radical honesty backfires and comparing it to real-life headline moments where people had to make a split-second choice under extreme stress or duress. Welcome to those listeners who are new and not so new here. I look at these stories through a pretty unique lens, blending my background in HR and my IO psych background with a lifelong obsession with pop culture. So usually I would compare those endings to my experiences, but there's also so many real stories other than mine. So instead, today, I will be pulling in fascinating real-world incidents and insights to ask a bigger question. When a movie pushes its characters to the absolute brink, how does that stack up against how real people actually react, reboot, or cope when things go completely off the rails? Now let's jump into the recap. Before we dive well into the recap, I wanted to give a quick heads up because The Drama is such a new release, like within the past year. This entire episode contains a bunch of spoilers. If you haven't seen the film yet or want to go in fresh, definitely bookmark this episode and then come back right after you watch, or watch at your discretion. Just know that there may be some heavy topics at the heart of this story. While The Drama plays out as a dark relationship comedy/drama, Emma's confession involves a deeply sensitive and controversial topic of a young person planning something tragic, harmful, and traumatizing. We're going to discuss the weight of that confession and how it impacts relationships. So please keep that sensitive context in your mind as we jump into the recap. The drama follows an engaged couple, Charlie and Emma. Charlie is played by Robert Pattinson and Emma Zendaya, who appear to have a sweet, quirky, and picture-perfect relationship on the surface. But during a pre-wedding game of sharing secrets, Emma drunkenly confesses a dark, shocking truth from her past. As a distressed teenager, she planned a mass school shooting before having a last-second change of heart and walking away. In contrast, Charlie reveals a relatively minor, harmless lie from when they first met. So, don't want to spoil that, just in case you watch the movie. That single night of confession triggers spirals for Charlie. So with what he heard, he's unable to process Emma's past. His trust disintegrates into paranoia, emotional judgment, and infidelity with a coworker. Over the course of the wedding week, the internal tension mounts until it reaches a boiling point, culminating in this chaotic, violent physical altercation right at the reception floor that causes chaos at their wedding. Following the public humiliation and destruction of their event, a bruised and battered Charlie sits alone in their favorite diner booth. Suddenly, Emma walks in, rain-soaked in her pristine wedding dress. Instead of confronting the cheating, the ruined wedding, or the heavy trauma of her past, or even what Charlie did, they pull back into an inside joke, which was role-playing as complete strangers meeting for the first time in a diner, choosing to reboot their relationship on a shared, constructed performance rather than reality. So now we're going to get into the part where we talk about the finale elements versus the things that have happened in real life. So the first one we're going to talk about is Emma's confession versus the last second internal shift. So the entire overarching emotional trauma hanging over the film's climax stems from Emma's pre-wedding confession. She admits that when she was 15 years old, she went so far as to plan a mass school shooting, but she experienced a last-second internal change of heart and then walked away before pulling the trigger due to seeing another local shooting right when she planned to do hers. The tragedy of the film's ending is that even though Emma made the right choice to abort her plans years ago, Charlie simply cannot process the heavy weight of her past. He starts spiraling. He passes judgment. He becomes paranoid, with every little thing that she's doing. Like, is that something that is of a violent past? Like, whatever she's doing, is it because she's violent or whatever the case may be? And it pushes him into an emotional breakdown, leading him to cheat, panic, and completely blow up their engagement right before they reach the altar. Just everything is just chaos. So now we're going to talk about a real situation that could be compared to this. So in 2013, at a Houston airport in Texas, a heavily armed man posted online about committing a mass shooting on one of the terminals. Upon arriving at the airport, he experienced an unexpected change of heart. He documented his shift in a handwritten note, and then he fatally shot himself without harming any travelers. According to several reports on CNN and the city of Houston PD and various witness statements, the man attempted to kidnap a coworker several days earlier and then internally made a decision, as he noted in his suicide note, to change his mind and not go through with the mass shooting and instead harming himself. Some questions come to mind about why he changed his mind. What was the conversation with that victim like that he attempted to kidnap? Or was it the drive to the airport that suddenly changed his mind? Because remember, he posted online earlier about a mass shooting that he was going to commit. Or was it something entirely different that caused him to change his mind? Like, what was it? All these things could have been factors, but there are also other factors we may never be aware of. It's interesting to try to understand like what this individual may have been feeling, like Charlie was from the movie when he was spiraling, making irrational or stupid decisions like him about to cheat or him questioning his fiance about all these little things that she used to do, like she'd done before and like what it really means. He was trying to like analyze what was why she would make that decision to go through with it and then change her mind, or go as much to planning it and then change her mind. I mean, the man at the airport, he did leave a suicide note saying he had planned something more and decided to change his mind in the last hour. He was trying to show mercy. Uh, and so while obviously he's not around anymore, we'll never really understand fully what made him change his mind. But maybe somewhere between when he tried the attempted kidnapping um, of a former coworker, or on his way to the airport after he posted that notice online, the number of triggers that make people change their mind. So it's just interesting to know that he experienced something within those hours leading up to that incident, that he didn't go through with it and instead he killed himself. Real world incidents demonstrate that individuals on the brink of carrying out extreme violence can experience a sudden, decisive internal shift. And this real life situation proves how an internal reflection at the absolute last second can alter an intended path of violence. So while he didn't harm others, thank goodness, he did harm himself, unfortunately, to be able to help him help him find a different path other than that absolute ending path for him. So it's just interesting how we can relate like to somebody changing their mind and how detrimental it can be to society, whether they did it or not. We often hear a lot about mass school shootings, mass shootings in general, especially in America. So sometimes people are like riddled with something and have a sudden reflection that makes them change their mind. And while we may never know all the instances for every single mass shooting that happens, or every person that decides to do traumatic things to harm others or to harm themselves, sometimes there are things that shift and will cause a person to change their mind. And sometimes it benefits others. So, yeah. Now we're going to go into the next finale element, the public reception collapse versus de-escalation through vulnerability. So at the wedding reception, we're talking about the movie, the sheer expectation to put on this perfect facade for their family of Charlie and Emma, for their family and guests, completely disintegrates in the most explosive way possible. Charlie's unaddressed panic over Emma's confession reaches a boiling point. when he encounters his coworker's boyfriend on the floor. Instead of pulling Emma aside or having a conversation, he loses control and gets into a brutal, violent physical fight right in front of everybody. The illusion shatters, ending the reception in absolute chaos and humiliation. Everybody's kind of trying to figure out what's going on. Why is there fighting at a wedding? And all these things, as Emma and Charlie are like forced to flee the venue separately, leaving their families, friends, and entire lives like scattered in this like fallout of what happened at the wedding. So now we're going to talk about the real experience. So when an unaddressed stress or an impending crisis peaks, panic and physical force can cause a total breakdown. Whereas sometimes when you look at the opposite side of it, you're looking at radical empathy and personal vulnerability can actually stop something massive or traumatic from happening. In 2013, a heavily armed 20-year-old entered the school and a bookkeeper stopped him from using force or escalating panic. So the way she did this, she tried to de-escalate the situation by calmly speaking to the armed man for over an hour, sharing her own painful life experiences and personal struggles. And this is just a demonstration or a good example of how someone interfering in something that could potentially be tragic and how she averted it by kind of like relating to him on a different level. She was showing empathy and compassion, which helped the situation. It's just another example of like a connection with others and the impact it can have on someone having difficulty or preparing to make a mistake that would hurt others. She took it a step further by inserting herself into the narrative and kind of talking with him and seeing if talking with him actually changed his mind before he did anything tragic. Many people driven towards mass harm are sometimes trapped in like extreme, it's called cognitive distortion. And so what this is, it's a mindset where they feel so invisible, where they feel rejected or dehumanized that they view the entire world as like a hostile enemy. When somebody who's interrupting that violence steps in and validates their pain, instead of meeting them with aggression, it completely shatters that like concept. Just hearing someone acknowledging their suffering strips away their justification for violence, making it much harder to view everyone around them as an enemy. As covered in detailed accounts by BBC News, tracking like what motivated the shooter, the bookkeeper's willingness to open up with the shooter, it provided that human connection maybe he was lacking, which actually caused the gunman to abandon his plans and surrender without a single injury. Thank goodness. This is just an example of how like kind of relating to others kind of help somebody that you didn't even think needed help. And I think that when tragic things happen, we often forget that there's something underneath for the reason that that person is, trying to create such a chaotic environment or do something traumatic or violent. Um, there's something else going on. It doesn't make it excusable. It doesn't make it okay. It just means that there sometimes by somebody just reaching out can allow that person to take a second and kind of reflect and decide not to go through with it because somebody else is connecting them on a level they hadn't really had before. So now we're going to move on to the next finale element. It is the ambiguous diner reunion versus radical compassion in crisis. So in the movie, following the fallout of the wedding, the director of the movie shifts the film into like a quiet, almost dreamlike atmosphere. A bruised, bloodied, and battered Charlie sits entirely alone at their favorite diner booth, staring into space, kind of figuring out like, what do I do now? I just screwed everything up and I don't even know what this outcome is going to be. Suddenly, the door opens and Emma walks in wearing her pristine, rain-soaked wedding dress underneath her bright orange coat. She doesn't scream at Charlie for cheating or yell at him for ruining the reception. Instead, she sits across from him with a strange, calm, like acceptance. Almost like, okay, we're here now. What are we going to do? The film leaves it deeply ambiguous as to whether Emma physically walked straight to the diner from the venue, or did she go someplace else on the way there? Or as Charlie's mind tries to reconstruct comfort from this whole mess that he created or that he was part of. So that was one of the endings, and that was the ending of the movie. And so now we're going to talk about like what the comparison is. When someone is mentally spiraling or in acute distress, an unexpected act of physical warmth and non-judgmental embrace can serve as a powerful re-anchor. And that's what Emma essentially was trying to do. So in 2019, an armed student entered a high school with a loaded shotgun. The security guard and the football coach helped disarm him and immediately pulled the teenager into a comforting embrace. As documented in surveillance footage released by ABC News and firsthand reflections published through Oregon Public Broadcasting, this singular act of compassion de-escalated the threat before violence could begin, showing how human connection can save someone on the edge. So a little bit different from the last incident we talked about, last situation we talked about. This ties directly into something known as like the cooling off technique or principle. Those with intense surges of adrenaline and cortisol driving someone to commit violence are surprisingly short-lived. Just as an example, and maybe moms can relate, like when my child was a kid, or when your child was a kid, they sometimes would get upset and they would get hurt by falling while playing or something like that during a tantrum, resulting in screaming and crying. After you address whether any injuries took place and all is okay, I or you as a parent might be able to relate, would hold or hug the child to let them know that they were okay, essentially cooling off the hurt they felt at that moment. The technique is known to disrupt or delay that momentum by even like 15 to 30 minutes. The peak emotional wave naturally breaks. And that's why the coach's response was so powerful. When he disarmed that student and pulled him into a long, quiet hug, he wasn't just offering comfort. He was forcibly creating a physical pause. By holding him in that embrace, the coach bought critical time for those stress hormones to flush out, allowing the student's overwhelming urge for violence to collapse into exhaustion, remorse, and surrender. So this ended up, in hindsight, well, whether the individual that was going to cause the harm and do the shooting actually felt in a state of embrace and then changed how he was going to do and what he was going to act. So to relate that back to Emma went to the diner almost like not telling Charlie, but saying in an embrace or saying it by looking without saying all the words she needed to say was like, it's okay. We'll figure this out. And that's all you kind of really get is like, we'll figure this out and let's start anew, basically. Because remember, they went into the diner role playing as if they didn't know each other or that they were strangers. So now we're going to talk about the last element. We're going to kind of re-engage that meet cute role play that they did in the movie. And then we're going to talk about versus leaving or abandoning your intentions and mental resets. And we talked about in the film's final moments, Emma goes to the diner. She sits down calmly and she pretends she doesn't know Charlie. Like this is the first time they're meeting. They've talked about this a little bit in the movie. And they're going to start playing like they're total strangers. They don't talk about the infidelity. They don't talk about the wedding that like ended in chaos. And they don't even talk about Emma's past trauma and what she had planned when she was a teenager. Instead, Emma looks at Charlie and treats him like a total stranger, saying, okay, we're going to start with this and kind of work our way. They decide to reboot their entire relationship right there at the counter. And it directly mirrors the harmless lie Charlie told her when they first began dating. I know I won't spoil that. This is in the movie, but revealing a chilling thing that these two people realize their relationship can only survive if they agree to erase reality and then choose a comfortable performance over the unbearable truth. So instead of addressing all the issues that came up during their engagement leading to the wedding and what happened at the wedding, they're kind of like silently saying, all right, let's just start over and figure it out, right? Like they're married at this point. So let's just figure it out. Well, now we're going to talk about the real life comparison. When a reality or plan becomes too overwhelming to maintain, individuals sometimes seek a mental reset to retreat from something that's going to end in chaos. So very similar to like in the movie, in that scene, uh, it's like by Emma sitting down and pretending to be a stranger. It's kind of like resetting, like what just happened. Instead of just going, oh my God, this was horrible. We need to talk about everything. It was just like her way of kind of relating to him and saying, all right, let's just pretend like we don't know each other for a minute and then we'll figure it out. As documented in initial investigation findings by USA Today, this case I'm going to talk about illustrates how, like, the human mind, when pushed to the absolute brink, will abruptly abandon an active scenario to force a complete reset. So in 2013, in a university in Florida, a 30-year-old student armed with an assault rifle, handgun, and explosives barricaded himself in a dorm room with initial plans to attack others. There were reports after finalizing his strategy, he had like used a checklist to follow the steps of his plan and kind of annotated as he was working through it. And it's a possibility that he was freaked out by the swift response of the police, because then he changed his plan and turned to harm himself instead. When I think about this situation, I think about the fight or flight response, because it gives us such a fascinating look at what happens inside like our brain during an acute crisis. When a person reaches the verge of extreme violence, the brain's threat and survival center completely takes over. It floods the system with like hyperarousal and creates an intense cognitive tunnel vision, rendering them temporarily incapable of processing long-term consequences. We usually see this response shattered by some like a shock, like a calm voice or a sudden hug. But what makes this incident so unique is that the interruption came from an internal shift. This student had barricaded himself in his dorm. He was surrounded by weapons and explosives, trapped entirely within the high stress fight or flight, and then suddenly just decided to change course. There was no real rhyme or reason of it. We just saw that he was going through his notes and then he turned on himself instead of actioning what he had planned. And I think that knowing that there is an opportunity within every person to kind of have a mental reset and maybe make decisions that could be bad and changing the direction of what they intended to originally. So he abandoned his plans and said, you know what, I'm not going to do this. Instead, I'm just going to harm myself. I think it's important to understand that this can happen to anybody. This can happen when you're like as simple as driving your car down the road and you realize you forgot to make a stop someplace. So you're redirecting what you were originally going to do and going someplace else. Or maybe you decided to take a different way going there. You saw a bunch of traffic or they're doing road construction work and you decided to take a different avenue or a different way than what you originally intended. All these things are possible. Like sometimes you just need a minute to like reset in your head about what you're planning to do and how that would impact going forward. And maybe that's what he had. It's going to be one of those things that we don't really know the answers to. But once again, it's really about being able to understand that people can find different ways to find mental resets within themselves, whether it be good, bad, traumatic, something great. So it's something that important to take away between those two elements, between that last element. So before we step into our final takeaways, I want to take a quick moment to thank all my listeners for supporting the show. I truly appreciate you being here. It's been fun and I love getting the feedback and suggestions, and it's been fantastic. So now we're going to head to our big takeaway. So the drama forces us to ask whether some relationships survive on genuine truth or on the shared stories we agreed to believe. In the case of Charlie and Emma, they're almost like agreeing to believe these things happen and then kind of resetting their relationship as they move forward in their marriage. When the curtain falls, sometimes starting over isn't about fixing the past, right? There's nothing anybody can do about the choices that you make that, could be harmful to others or were harmful to others. It's about deciding which type of performance you're willing to play next. So, do you want to make that decision to be that person that, and with these individuals that were about to carry out mass shootings that did not, that something changed and they did not? Um, what were they thinking when they decided to not go through with it? You know, they decided to basically play another role, whether it be to harm themselves or take responsibility for what they were about to do, things of that nature. And also, it's just a great takeaway is that be kind to others. You never know what someone is going through. And while we all have stuff going on in our personal lives, just remember someone or others could benefit from a little kindness or understanding. You just never know if that little thing is what triggers somebody from not making a drastic decision in their life that could harm themselves, harm others, things of that nature. And yeah, I think that, this world can just use in general a little bit more kindness across the board, whether you agree on, the same views or not. I think it's super important, I think, for people to have connections and feel like somebody cares at the end of the day. So yeah, that's going to be the end of our episode and wrapping up our episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Finale Compass. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thanks for listening. And until next time, when we map out our next ending, remember to look at the map, follow the needle, and help me navigate the chaos together. Bye now.